Hey, Jim Page here, fly fishing for the rest of us. I've been offline for a little bit. I had a striper trip at Christmas get blown up with a hospital visit, and my wife and I just spent 2 weeks in Florida. Had a good time, did some work, got to do some fishing, caught some snook, some tarpon, some crappie, some bluegill, some redbreast, and bass. So a few sea trout, and lost a shot at a red. So I thought today we would talk about how many fly rods do you really need. So in our previous videos, we said, okay, your first fly rod is a 5 weight, your second fly rod is a 9 weight. So will those two fly rods cover everything? I think a 5 and a 9 weight will cover a wide variety of fishing situations. What you will see, or when you talk to a lot of people over time, is there's one school of thought where people said all you need for fly fishing is a 4 weight, a 6 weight, an 8 weight, a 10 weight, and a 12 weight. And then you have another school of thought where they say you need a 3 weight, a 5 weight, a 7 weight, a 9 weight, and an 11 weight. If you have a 5 weight and a 9 weight, your next natural progression would be a 7 weight. That's a good light saltwater rod. It's a good bass rod. It's a good light salmon rod. It's a good sea trout rod, bonefish rod. It will do a variety of things. If you already have a 5 and an 8 weight, if you went ahead and bought an 8 weight, then you really have to ask yourself, am I fishing for trout predominantly? Are you in Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico, Utah, any of the really heavily Idaho, any of the states that really push have a great trout fishery? If you have a 5 and 8 weight, maybe you go down to a 10-foot 3 weight for Euro nymphing, or a little 6 foot 3 weight for small tiny creeks. Same if you live in the Northeast. So it really depends on where you're going to do the majority of your fishing. So let's talk about some specifics: 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 versus 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Your 12 weight at the top end of the range, your 12 11s, 12 weight is a good rod for giant tarpon. It's a good rod for small sailfish, large golden dorado. It's a little too big for peacock bass. And it's kind of fallen out of favor a little bit. I talked with a gentleman that I fished with in the Florida Keys several times, Captain Mike O'Brien. If you go down there to Key West, look him up. He's a great guy, and he's a good guy too. I talked to him about, he carried a 9, 10, and 11 on his boat. He had a 9 weight for bonefish, a 10 weight for permit, and an 11 weight for tarpon. And I said, asked him, I said, Mikey, why do you carry an 11 for tarpon instead of a 12? He said, well, the tarpon have gotten so pressured in the Keys that, they've gone down to using from 4/0 hooks down to 2/0 hooks, thin wire hooks, and they've gone from using 20-pound leader bite tippet, class tippet. They're going down to 16-pound class tippet or lighter for smaller fish. So the fishing pressure in the Keys has dictated a downsize of the tackle. I did think it was interesting that his first bonefish rod was, his lightest rod on his boat was a 9 weight. And I fished with several other guides in the Keys, and they all were fishing 9 weights for bonefish. If you go to the Bahamas, most everyone's fishing an 8 weight or a 7 weight. You can get away with a 6 weight. I caught one little tiny bonefish in Abaco you could have caught with a 3 weight. It was so small. I mean, it was tiny. So fishing pressure has kind of changed fishing behavior, and that has changed the tackle. And when you talk about how many rods do you need to fly fish, when I talked to Captain O'Brien, he lived in Key West. He loved Key West. He was never leaving Key West. He didn't care if a hurricane wiped every house off Key West. He would come back, rebuild his house, trailer his boat out. He told me, he said, I am never leaving Key West ever, ever, ever. And he said, we were talking about how many rods do you need? He goes, I only need 3 rods. He goes, I need a 9 weight for bonefish, I need a 10 weight for permit, and I need 11 weight for tarpon. He said, that's all the rods I need. He said, when I go out west to visit to Montana, sure, a 4 or 5 or 6 weight is great. He goes, but I usually just borrow someone's rod when I'm out there. And that's another thing we'll get into. So his specific location where he fished dictated the rods he needed, and he only carried on his boat the rods he needed, which is 9, 10, 11. You go to the Northeast, the striper guides up there, they've got 9, 10, 11s, but 9 would be the lightest rod they'd have for striper. They have a 10, could have some 11s. They'll have intermediate and sinking lines. The guys in Key West most of them have floating lines. Some have an intermediate sink for throwing tarpon in deep channels between the keys. So there's less dependence on non-floating lines in the Florida Keys than there would be in the Northeast. So going back to the sequence of rods 4, 5, 6, 7, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 versus a 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. There's some guys in Homosassa, Florida, who still throw 12s for giant tarpon. I think an 11, you can get by with an 11 weight for a tarpon. Going down the stack, a 10 weight is a good striper rod. It's a good rod for really large bass flies. It's not a bad rod at all. A 9 weight will do that also. You can throw large bass flies with a 9 weight. You can catch small stripers on a 9 weight. You can use a 9 weight in the lower keys, especially Marathon Key down south to Key West. A lot of folks use the 9 weights because there's so much wind. The bonefish are bigger and you're throwing bigger flies. A 7 weight is a good largemouth bass rod. It's a good small snook rod, beach snook rod. It's a good smallmouth bass rod. It's a good streamer rod for trout. It's a good all-around rod, and so is an 8 weight, but 8 weights are probably just a touch heavy for some species of fish, and you don't need an 8 weight for beach snook because there's no obstacles on the beach to pull the snook out of. We've already talked about a 5 weight, going from a 7 to a 5 weight. 5 weight's a good all-around rod for freshwater. Does a lot of different things. I was fishing a 5 weight when we were in Florida, catching baby tarpon with it, ladyfish, small trout, small snook, but also took it in the St. Johns River to catch crappie, and we were looking for shad. We didn't find any, and some redbreast and bluegill. And then a 3 weight, like I said, I have a 3 weight I use for really small streams in North Georgia, say streams under 20 feet wide. There's a lot of guys out west who are buying 10-foot 3 weights for Euro nymphing or tight line nymphing or nymphing without an indicator. And there's some guys who are getting 10-foot 3 weights and using them as a nymph rig. They're overlining them with a 5 weight fly line and just using them with a standard bobber or drift indicator, strike indicator, and using it just for nymphing, that 10 weight, because they can mend really well with it. And a 10-foot 3 weight's not going to wear your arm out. So I do want to touch about handles again. Like I told you earlier, this is my little 3 weight fiberglass rod I use for tiny creeks. It's got a half wells, cigar shape. I don't like this handle. I don't use this handle but for one thing, and that's really small creeks where sometimes I put my forefinger on top. Thumb can go on top, forefinger on top. I don't like this handle. I only have one rod like this, and I only use it in very small creeks. And that's a 3 weight, and it does everything I need to do in a small creek. Now, when you go up to your 5 weight, there's a couple things to consider. A 5 weight is going to perform better in the wind than a 4 weight. Many people use a 4 weight for dry fly fishing, really small dry flies. Some people now are using 3 weights for that, just because fishing is getting pressured everywhere. So when you look at your 5 weight, there are 5 weights that have this little snub nose or half wells grip. I do like this grip. On your least expensive 5 weights, they have the cigar grip, and it's not a bad grip. I just don't prefer it. And when you're talking about using your 5 weight in saltwater or for bass, larger bass, I think it's just a better grip. But you don't mandatorily have to have it. And most of the 5 weights with that type of grip are going to be more expensive. So, and there's different kind of 5 weights. Let me show you 2 examples. So years ago, Sage and Scott both made a saltwater specific 5 weight. They have since ceased. You can order a Sage X with a fighting butt, and that's their saltwater version. You see this Helios 5D, D for distance, does not have a fighting butt. I like a fighting butt. I dropped my rods accidentally. It gives a little more protection. It also, if you hook a big fish on your 5-weight, you can put that fighting butt into your belly, and it's a little more comfortable than just that metal. You really can't put that into your belly. You pretty much have to fight it with your forearm. This Sage X, compared to this 5D, I do like what Orvis has done with their top line Helios model. They have a D model and an F model. The D model is for distance and the F model is for feel. Feel has a slower action. Distance has a faster action. This Sage X is more of a true to line class, all water, slower, a little bit slower than, say, the Sage Salt HD. It's a good all around rod. If I was going to Montana or Wyoming, anywhere out west to trout fish, I would take this Sage X because it's got a slightly slower action, a little bit softer, better tippet protection than this 5D. However, if I was going to Florida and I wanted to venture and take like 2 rods, say I wanted to take a 5 and a 7 or a 5 and a 9 to Florida, I'd probably take this Orvis 5D even though it doesn't have a fighting butt because it's a more powerful rod. You can look at the shaft, which this is the butt section of the rod. You can look and see it's a little bit thicker than the X. Just a touch, not much. It's a little more powerful rod than the X because it's a faster action. The components are a little bit different. The material is a little bit different. The blank material. You can put a lot of pressure on this and not snap it in half. I have a 6 D that I've fished in ditches for tarpon, and I've really put a lot of pressure on it, and it did not explode on me. So that was the 5-weight rod that we talked about in the previous videos, your first rod. Your second rod, of course, is the 9-weight. The third rod that we're talking about, because if you've got a 5, 7, and 9, you're going to cover a lot of fishing situations. You'll see this is a 7-weight. This is a G. Loomis Asquith. The 6-weight fly rods, a lot of them do not have a fighting butt. They're traditional trout 6-weight, which is a slower action fly rod, for many years did not come with a fighting butt. They came like this 5-weight, no fighting butt on the end. I like fighting butts. I find them to be very useful. So you'll see that compared to this 5, this 7 looks almost thinner than the 5, and that's because of the construction material in this 7-weight. This is a G. Loomis Asquith. If I was to take one of my Scott 7-weight and put it next to this 5-weight Sage X, that Scott has a larger diameter blank. That's just the way Scott builds them. And it would look larger in diameter than this 5-weight. The way G. Loomis builds these Asquith with the Spiral X technology, they can come up with a thinner, lighter blank. You notice that the 7-weight has a nice fighting butt. It has a double up-locking reel seat. It's got 2 rings here instead of 1. On a 5-weight in freshwater, 6-weight in freshwater, trout, rainbows, browns, a single up-locking reel seat works fine. You get out in saltwater, I'd rather have the twin locking reel seat. And the fighting butt to me is very important. This Sage X has, on this 5-weight, this Sage X has a single, even though it came with a fighting butt or with a fighting butt, and this is really their saltwater version of a 5. It has a single up-locking reel seat. I really would prefer that be a double up-locking reel seat. This works, but in saltwater, I'd rather have a double. So, if you went ahead and bought a 5-weight, and you've got the 9-weight, and you can see the 9-weight is substantially bigger than the 7-weight. There's a 7-weight. You see the fighting butts are substantially bigger. And G. Loomis does make their fighting butt a little bit smaller. You can see the fighting butts are substantially bigger. There's a double up-locking reel seat. I like that. You can see this first section, or the butt section, or the shaft of the fly rod. You see that 9-weight, how much thicker it is than a 7-weight. Especially if you pick up a 9-weight to a 5-weight. That's a big jump Now you can catch a lot of fish with a 5 and 9 weight, but you'll see the substantial difference between the two. These are both Sage X. They're the same model, same construction principles. They both have fighting butts. This is a 9 weight. This is a 5 weight. But you can see how much taller the grip is on this 9 weight versus the 5 weight. They both have hook keepers. You can see that the 9 weight, see how much thicker it is there. So it's a substantial rod. So going from a 5 to 9 is a pretty big jump. So I know you're saying, well, Jim, should it be a 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, or a 3, 5, 7, 9, 11? Part of that depends on where you live. Like I said, there's folks out west who have a 10-foot 3 weight, a 5 weight, and an 8 weight. And the 8 weight's for throwing big streamers to trout. I know folks in Florida who have 6 weights and 9 weights, and that's it. I know folks in Florida who have 5 weights and 9 weights. Like I said, I have fished with guides in the lower Keys that have a 9, 10, 11 on their boat, and that's it. Or maybe they'll have a 9, 10, 11, but they'll have 2 of one model, one with an intermediate sink, one with a floating line on it. So whether you purchase a 4, 6, 8, 10, or a 3, 5, 7, 9, I don't think you can go wrong. 9, 11. So the one thing is, if you fish in this country, most of the guides in this country, the United States, are gonna have fly fishing equipment. I'm talking about if you book a guide who presents himself as a fly fishing guide. They have a traditional poling skiff. They usually have fly fishing equipment that you can use, and it's usually pretty decent. That's why fly fishing guides cost more than a conventional guide, because fly fishing equipment costs more than conventional equipment. So if you say, I really don't want to invest in an 11 weight or 12 weight, you really don't have to if you fish in this country. Lower Keys, Florida, Louisiana, the West Coast, because you can use a 10, 11 weight for small makos and blue sharks out on the West Coast, like in San Diego, California, with Conway Bowman. I've fished with him and his guides for blues and makos. Most guides that I have fished with in the United States have the rods that they need for their air, for the type fish they're catching. So you really don't have to purchase, say, a 10 weight or 11 weight or 12 weight if you don't want to. Now, if you leave this country and you go to the Bahamas or the Amazon, or the Mexican, Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, Belize, you're probably going to need to take, or I'll say, just take all your equipment. You're going to need to have your equipment. You're going to need to have your fly rods and your flies and your leaders. So in that case, if you say, I want to travel, I want to go to Belize and I want to catch migratory tarpon when they come through, on top of catching permit and bonefish, well, you might need 11 or 12 weight, at least an 11 weight down there if you're going to target migrating tarpon, because the lodges down there aren't going to have fly equipment. And there's no fly shops available. I mean, if you're fishing out of Key West, there's a fly shop on Key West. There's a fly shop on Islamorada. Strangely enough, there's not a fly shop in New Orleans anymore. There is a fly shop up in Shreveport. So it's a little bit, there's one little tiny fly shop on King Street, and they carry some flies, but not much. Nice people run it, but they just don't have a lot of selection. So if you're going to Louisiana, you're going to probably need to carry your flies and your fly fishing equipment, unless you fish with a guide, then he'll have that for you. Same with Texas, there's fly shops, the guides out there have equipment. West Coast, same thing. If you go to Oahu, there's a fly to fish for bonefish. There's fly shops on Oahu. And you can get whatever you need, replacement rods, reels, fly lines, because there's a good chance you're going to get a fly line cut off in Hawaii when you're fishing for bonefish, because of the Pancake Flats. Alaska, same thing. In Anchorage, there's a fly shop. There's a fly shop in Anchorage. So in this country, you don't really need as much tackle as if you're going to travel outside the country. So if you have a 5 and a 9, I would say pick up a 7. If you have a 5 and an 8 and you live in trout water, you might want to look at a 10-foot 3. You might want to look at a little 7-foot fiberglass or bamboo for small creeks, depending on where you fish. If you think you're going to travel a lot to the Northeast, if you live in the predominantly west trout areas and you're going to go to a lot, you think you're going to go to the northeast some and fish for stripers, or maybe Florida. If you got an 8, maybe pick up a 10 for a 5, 8, 10. I don't think you can go wrong with any of those. Um, I prefer to fish light as far as I do a lot of blind casting places where I fish, and I have to do a lot of casts. So if I can throw a 7 weight instead of an 8 weight, I'll do that. If I can throw a 5 weight instead of a 6 weight, I'll do that. If I can throw a 9 instead of a 10, I'll do that. Just because a lot of times I end up throwing, hundreds of blind casts where I fish. The other thing too to think about in saltwater, like I said earlier, there's no companies making saltwater specific 5 weights. You have to special order an X from Sage to get the fighting butt on it, but it's still a relatively soft 5 weight. This is that 591X. A lot of companies, the lightest saltwater rod they make is a 6 weight. One company, G. Loomis, the lightest saltwater specific rod they make is a 7 weight. Some companies, the heaviest all water or freshwater rod they make is an 8 weight. Some it's a 9 weight. So the companies kind of dictate what rods you can use in what environments or what rods are available. For a while, there was no fly line manufacturers making a 5 weight bonefish line or a 5 weight line geared to the saltwater. When Sage and Scott were making their saltwater 5s, you could get a saltwater 5 weight fly line from Rio and from Scientific Anglers. Well, there are a couple of years that stopped. They quit making a 5 weight line, but now you have more people using 5 weights in saltwater instead of 6s. And so now you can get 5 weight fly lines for bass, and they just call them tropical lines that you can use on your 5 weight if you're going saltwater where it's really warm. So I don't think you can go wrong with a 579. I don't think you need to rush out and buy an 11 weight or a 12 weight or a 10 weight if you're going to fish in this country. If you have a 5 and an 8, if you live somewhere on the East Coast or Southeast and you think you might be doing some fishing, you might want to pick up a 10 for big bass, permit, small tarpon. Or if you're out west, you might want to look into a short 3 weight, or you might want to look into a 10-foot 3 weight. Depends on how much trout fishing you do. I tend to lean to the 579 over the 468. A 4 weight does not perform that well in the wind. A 4 weight has some limitations. The line mass is not that great, and you don't see any saltwater specific or tropic specific 4 weight fly lines on the market. Usually the lowest you'll see that are really hot weather tropic specific fly lines are at a 5 weight. So that's why I kind of lean to the 579. Many times if I'm going to the Everglades, I'll take a 5 and 7. If I'm going on the southwest side of Florida, around Naples, where there's a lot more snook, and I'm going to do a lot of saltwater fishing, I'll take a 7-9. There's a lot of people who fish 6 weights in the Everglades, and they fish 6 weights on the southwest coast of Florida just because the fishing pressure there is pretty high too. So 6 weight's still a good rod. So if you have a 4 and an 8 or a 5 and an 8, do you need 6 weight? I don't know. I would just probably overline my 5 weight and just keep the 5/8 and then go to a 10 or go down to a 3. I don't think you need to have an 8 weight and a 9 weight. Both. You can overline your 8 weight, throw a 9 weight line on it, and it will suffice. And if you're traveling in this country, there'll be guys, they'll have 9 weights if you need to use a 9 weight. That's usually not a problem. So there you have it. 579, good starting 3 rods. You can cover a lot of fishing with those 3 rods. If you really think you want to do some big fish, larger pike, larger muskie, tarpon, golden dorado, large peacock bass, then maybe you get a 579 11. Like I said, if you have a 5 and an 8, that's what you have, and it's working for you. Maybe you get a 3, maybe you get a 10, depending on where you go and what you want to do. But really, you really only need 3 rods or 4 rods to cover everything that you want to do. Lefty put out a DVD a long time ago, and he said you need a 4, 5, or 6 for trout, an 8 for your general all-purpose everything, bass, snook, bonefish, and then a 9 or a 10. He was saying you only need 3 rods. And you can do a lot with those 3 rods, and you could do a lot with a 5.79 or a lot with a 6.810. Especially depends on where you live. If you live in the southeast in Florida, if you're not going to do a lot of freshwater trout fishing, then you don't need a 3-weight. You don't really need a 4-weight. You can use the 5-weight, or you can go heavier, because you never know what you're going to catch. I can tell you, on this last trip to Florida, I was throwing in my 5-weight for some baby tarpon, and I didn't even have my 7-weight with me. We had gone to the St. Johns River with a 5-weight, our 5-weights, and caught some crappie and some bluegill and some redbreast, and then we decided to go hit some ditches and a finger off of Mosquito Lagoon, and we were jumping small tarpon, and we also went and found some little snook and trout right at the end of the day, eating little tiny glass minnows, either glass minnows or mollies or little mud minnows. But you can see the minnows moving around. They're about that big. And all of a sudden, so we're catching little 12, 14-inch snook and trout, little 10 to 14-inch ladyfish, good 5-weight fish. Well, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a redfish showed up, and he tailed, and his back was about 3 feet long. So he was probably somewhere between, 36 and 42 inches, and he was the only redfish in that little cove. Not anything you really want to catch on a 5-weight. A 7, 8, or 9 would have been better. I threw at him. He took my little size 8 hook, and I couldn't get the hook into him because he was just too big and the hook was too small. And he ended up spitting the hook. But he made a big swirl. I was like, yeah, I think I should have had my 7-weight or a 9-weight. He was big enough to catch on a 9-weight or an 8-weight. So, like I said, I like 5.79, 11 if you want to go big. If you don't want to go big, 5.79 covers a lot of things. A 6.810 is not bad. 4.68 is not bad. It just depends on where you're at and how much fishing you want to do. And the other thing too is, if you're going to use your rods in saltwater, we talked about earlier about anodized reels, seats, anodized reels, good solid drags. If I'd have hooked that 36 plus inch redfish, and if that hook would have stayed, if I had had a cheap drag or an inexpensive drag, he would have melted the drag. He'd have melted the plastic washers onto the stainless steel washers. So one thing is, when you fish saltwater, there's a higher opportunity or a greater potential that you'll hook a fish very large, very strong, that if you have a drag that's not up to the test, you're going to end up with a broken, a melted reel. You don't really have that in freshwater as much. Yeah, you can hook big carp. You can take a 5-weight and hook a 20-pound plus carp, and he'll melt your drag too. But usually in freshwater, it's a finite body of water, and there's less room for the fish to run away from you. If you catch a carp in a large pond, eventually he's going to run out of water and come back at you. Where we were fishing in the Lower Mosquito Lagoon, that redfish could have run and taken on my fly line and taken on my backing and popped my knot because I wasn't in a boat. I couldn't chase him. We were fishing from the bank. So there's always a potential in saltwater to hook a fish that you can't stop right away. And because saltwater is so vast, if you don't have a good drag, there's plenty of room for them to run and plenty of room for them to melt your drag. So I'd like to see you buy less equipment of higher quality than more equipment of less quality. And like I said, I lean to 5.79, 4.68. It's not bad combination either. And then the big stuff is only if you need it, you want it, or you're going to travel out of the country. So that's all for this video. I'm going to put out some more videos now that I'm back from Florida and out of the hospital. And we're going to talk a little bit about stuff to take to Florida with you. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about fly lines. I don't think we need to. We already discussed them at length. So there's my recommendation. I kind of lean to the 5.79 or 5.79 11. So you only need 3 fly rods, maybe 4 fly rods. And I've seen a lot of people on YouTube who buy like a dozen fly rods that are less expensive. And I'm like, you really don't need all that. You don't need that much to fly fish. Don't overcomplicate it. So thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you all again soon.